The dashboard clock froze at 1:40 a.m. as the blinding light enveloped Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson's patrol car. 1 second he was alone on the empty stretch of Highway 220, 10 miles west of Stephen, Minnesota. Next, something impossible was happening. The light wasn't approaching. It was already inside the vehicle with him. Not reflecting, not shining through the windows, but somehow occupying the same space. Glass shattered. Metal groaned against forces it was never designed to withstand. Time itself seemed to fracture as the light intensified, burning his eyes like he'd stared into an arc welder without protection. Johnson raised his arms instinctively, the movement dreamlike and useless against whatever was happening. The dashboard clock read 1:40 a.m., the second hand trembling between ticks. His wristwatch stopped at the same instant. Through searing pain, Johnson glimpsed his speedometer needle dropping as the squad car continued moving forward without acceleration, as if caught in some invisible current. His hands were no longer on the wheel. The vehicle drifted, its trajectory determined by forces beyond mechanical explanation. Everything was light, everything was silence, everything was wrong. The light held him suspended in a moment that shouldn't exist, a tear in the fabric of normal reality that his mind struggled to process. This was northern Minnesota farm country, not the Twilight Zone. He was a practical man, a county deputy doing his job on a routine patrol. This kind of thing didn't happen to men like Val Johnson. But it was happening. His military training, his law enforcement experience, his entire framework for understanding the world, none of it provided protocol for this. The light was both outside and inside him now, like it was examining him from multiple dimensions simultaneously. How do you return to ordinary life when you've glimpsed a reality that makes everything ordinary feel like a lie? Then darkness. When consciousness returned, Johnson found himself slumped over the steering wheel of his squad car, which now sat at a perfect 90-degree angle to the highway. Blood trickled from a small wound on his forehead. His eyes burned as if scorched. Outside the shattered windshield, stars wheeled in the cold Minnesota sky. The dashboard clock read 2:19 a.m. "What the hell?" he whispered to the empty car. 39 minutes had vanished, along with 14 minutes from both his wristwatch and the car's clock. Johnson reached for the radio with a shaking hand, pressed the transmit button, and heard his own voice steady despite everything saying words that would become part of UFO investigation history. "Something hit me. Something just hit my car." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Location, Deputy Johnson? Are you injured? Highway 220, about 10 miles west of Stephen. And I think I'm okay. Can you identify what you hit?" "I don't know what it was," Johnson replied, looking at the spider-webbed windshield, the crumpled hood, the hazard lights smashed inward as if struck by some tremendous force. "It wasn't a vehicle. I don't know what the hell it was. Stay where you are. Help is on the way." "Dispatch, you should know. My watch is showing different time than yours will be. Both it and the car clock. They're missing time." A long pause. "Come again, deputy." "Never mind. Just get someone out here." 854 feet of unexplained trajectory behind him, 14 minutes erased from time itself, and not a single conventional explanation in sight. When he managed to open the driver's side door, the cold Minnesota air rushed in, but it brought no clarity. Johnson stood on shaking legs, trying to process what had just happened. The squad car looked as if it had collided with something substantial. The hood dented, one headlight shattered, both antennas bent at impossible angles. Yet there was no other vehicle, no deer carcass, nothing that could explain the damage. "This isn't possible," he said aloud, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness of the rural landscape. He touched his eyes gingerly, feeling the burning pain. Whatever the light had been, it had left physical evidence on both man and machine. As Johnson limped back to his vehicle to radio for help, a profound realization settled over him. He was now stranded between two worlds, the rational, explainable one he had patrolled just moments ago, and whatever lay beyond that boundary. His report would contain only facts, measurable damage, and observable evidence. He would make no claims about aliens or spaceships, but whatever had happened on this desolate stretch of road had changed everything. In less than an hour, or was it precisely 39 minutes minus 14, Deputy Val Johnson had become part of something that would challenge the boundaries of conventional explanation for decades to come. And the clock was still ticking. Before we continue the video, make sure you're subscribed. August 26, 1979. Marshall County, Minnesota. The summer heat had finally broken. Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson rolled down the window of his squad car, letting the cool night air wash over him as he turned onto County Highway 5. Midnight had come and gone, and the vast northern Minnesota landscape had settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Val was 35, lean and practical, with a military background that had instilled in him a methodical approach to both his worldview and his work as a law enforcement officer. 13 years on the job had taught him that most mysteries had simple explanations. The strange noise was usually a raccoon. The suspicious character was typically just a lost traveler. The unidentified light in the sky was almost always a weather balloon, aircraft, or satellite. He had a wife, Roseanne, who would be sleeping now, and children, one still a baby. The other school, agitucked safely in their beds back in Oslo. The thought of them provided a warm counterpoint to the isolation of rural night patrol. Marshall County stretched across 1,775 square miles of mostly farmland and small towns, with fewer than 14,000 residents spread throughout. On nights like this, it could feel like the emptiest place on earth. The dashboard clock read 12:17 a.m. His shift would end at 8 o'clock, nearly 8 hours away. The radio had been quiet since 11:30, when he'd cleared a routine traffic stop outside of Warren, the county seat. Just the way he liked it. The headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the straight two-lane highway that cut through fields of wheat and sugar beets. This was good country, hardworking, practical people who valued straightforward honesty and common sense. Val fit right in here, having grown up in similar small-town circumstances. Marshall County Sheriff Dennis Brecka had just instituted a new patrol pattern that brought deputies out to these more remote areas at night. Some questioned the necessity. Crime was minimal this far out, but Val appreciated the solitude and the sense of being a protective presence, even in the county's most isolated corners. He passed a farmhouse, lights still on in a single downstairs window, someone else awake in the vast darkness. He wondered briefly who it might be and what kept them from sleep at this hour, then returned his attention to the road. The local paper had run a piece last week about increased sightings of strange lights over northwestern Minnesota. Val had skimmed it without much interest. The Cold War created all kinds of unusual air traffic, and the nearby Grand Forks Air Force Base ran regular operations that could appear mysterious to civilians. There were rational explanations for these things. Always. As Highway 5 continued westward, the farmhouses grew more distant from one another. Agricultural fields gave way occasionally to patches of woodland and wetland. Val checked his rear-view mirror, nothing but darkness behind him. He was now 10 miles west of Stephen, one of the smallest towns in his patrol area. Out here, the only company was the occasional owl or deer crossing the empty road. The moon hung low and yellow on the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Out here, the stars were brilliant, unchallenged by artificial light. Val glanced up through the windshield, taking in the vast panorama of the Milky Way. Growing up in rural Minnesota, he developed an appreciation for clear night skies, could identify most major constellations, and understood the basic movements of celestial bodies. His wristwatch showed 1:23 a.m. He'd been driving for over an hour without seeing another vehicle. The monotony was broken occasionally by checking outbuildings or investigating shadows that usually turned out to be nothing more than wind-blown debris or nocturnal wildlife. Something about the quality of the night felt different. Maybe it was the unusual clarity of the atmosphere, or perhaps just the profound solitude of being the only human awake for miles. Val had experienced this feeling before during night patrols, a heightened awareness, almost a sixth sense, like the natural world was holding its breath. What if the world we trust to stay predictable is always just one moment away from proving us wrong? At 1:32 a.m., he made a routine stop at a roadside rest area, stepping out of his vehicle to stretch his legs. The silence was absolute, no insect sounds, no distant traffic system, the rustle of leaves in trees. Just the faint tick of his cooling engine and his own breathing. Something flickered at the edge of his vision, so brief he might have imagined it. A flash of light to the west, like distant heat lightning, but the sky was clear. Probably just his eyes adjusting to the darkness after looking at the dashboard instruments. Back in the car, Val made a note in his log. 1:35 a.m., all quiet in western sector. He would continue his patrol route, heading south before looping back toward Warren. the mundane rhythms of rural law enforcement. As he approached the intersection with State Highway 220 at 1:40 a.m., the dashboard radio emitted a burst of static, then fell silent again. Through the windshield, he noticed something unusual alight in the sky ahead. Too bright and too stationary to be a star, too large to be an aircraft running light. 20 years as a licensed pilot had given him familiarity with aerial phenomena. This didn't match any aircraft lighting configuration he recognized. It seemed to hover low on the horizon, its brightness fluctuating slightly. Experience told him to document what he was seeing. He reached for his clipboard to make a note, momentarily taking his eyes off the strange light. When he looked up again, the light had grown visibly larger. Not brighter larger, as if approaching rapidly. Could it be a plane in distress, attempting an emergency landing on the highway? His law enforcement instincts kicked in. If something was coming down, he needed to be there, to secure the scene, to render aid. Deputy Johnson flicked on his squad car's emergency lights and made a left turn onto Highway 220, moving toward the mysterious glow that seemed to be descending toward the Earth's surface. The clock on his dashboard read 1:40 a.m. His wristwatch showed the same. He had no way of knowing that he had just crossed a boundary between the world as he understood it and something entirely different, something that would permanently alter his life, challenge his convictions, and become one of the most credible and perplexing UFO encounters in American history. August 26, 1979, Marshall County, Minnesota. The first hours after Val Johnson's encounter unfolded in a haze of medical examinations and preliminary reports. The hospital in Warren confirmed what felt immediately apparent to Val's eyes had sustained burns similar to those caused by arc welding, despite having no memory of exposure to such intense light. The bump on his forehead was minor, requiring no stitches, but the doctors could offer no explanation for how he had remained unconscious for 39 minutes with such a relatively minor injury. Sheriff Dennis Brecka arrived at the hospital before dawn, concern etched across his weathered face. The brief conversation between them revealed Johnson's certainty that whatever happened on that road wasn't normal. Brecka had already seen the vehicle, the spider-webbed windshield, the broken headlight, the oddly bent antennas. Most disturbing was the position of the squad car itself, found at a perfect 90-degree angle to the road after apparently coasting over 850 feet from the point of impact. By morning, the damaged patrol car had been towed to a secure garage at the sheriff's office. News traveled quickly through the department. Deputies who had worked alongside Johnson for years approached the vehicle with skeptical curiosity that quickly transformed into uneasy silence as they observed the damage firsthand. The clocks bothered everyone the most. Both the car's dashboard clock and Johnson's wristwatch had stopped at 1:40 a.m. and then restarted 14 minutes slow. The two timepieces, completely unconnected systems, had experienced identical malfunctions. The statistical improbability hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. How do you rebuild your sense of reality when the evidence in front of you refuses to follow its rules? 3 days after the incident, the Air Force and FAA confirmed no aircraft had been scheduled or reported in that area during the early hours of August 27th. Sheriff Brecka, increasingly troubled by the lack of conventional explanation, contacted the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois. At home, Val found himself struggling to sleep. The encounter played on endless loop in his mind, the light entering the car, the sound of breaking glass, then nothing until he awoke with burning eyes and missing time. Roseanne noticed him standing at the window each night, staring at the stars with an expression she'd never seen before. Her gentle suggestions that he talk to someone about the experience were met with quiet resistance. What could he say? He didn't even know what had happened out there. The Marshall County Sheriff's Office held a press conference on August 30th, officially announcing the incident and the ongoing investigation. Sheriff Brecka's decision to place Johnson on press release duty was intended as a kindness, keeping him away from patrol while his eyes healed, but it only increased his exposure to questions he couldn't answer. Reporters arrived from Minneapolis, then Chicago, then national outlets. The telephone began ringing constantly at the Johnson household. Strangers appeared at their door, some sympathetic, others demanding the truth. Val maintained the same careful account, no claims about aliens or spaceships, just the facts as he had experienced them. Something hit his car. He didn't know what it was. When Guy Westcott from the Center for UFO Studies arrived on September 4th to conduct magnetic testing on the car and interview Johnson, the deputy approached the session with cautious hope for answers. The meticulous examination lasted hours, with Westcott documenting every dent, crack, and bend in the vehicle. The formal questioning concluded with Westcott asking if, in Johnson's professional opinion, this damage could have been caused by a collision with another vehicle or a large animal. Val studied the precisely bent antennas, the pattern of impact that had shattered both the windshield and one headlight simultaneously, the absence of paint transfer or biological material. His negative response was firm and certain. The final fracture in Val's carefully maintained rationality came in November, when Roland Wardell, a metal engineer from Honeywell, arrived at the sheriff's office to conduct independent tests. For hours, Wardell examined the car in silence, taking measurements and photographs with scientific precision. As the afternoon light faded, Wardell finally closed his notebook and faced Sheriff Brecka and Deputy Johnson. His professional assessment stated with certainty that the vehicle had encountered some form of electrical force or field that caused this pattern of damage. Most significantly, he could find no single earthly explanation that accounted for all of it. The words lingered in the air, scientific validation of what Val had known since that moment at 1:40 a.m., when time itself had fractured along with the windshield of his squad car. There was a dividing line in his life now, everything before the light and everything after. And he was just beginning to understand how dramatically the after would reshape his existence. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button. August 27th, 1979, 1:40 a.m. Deputy Val Johnson's headlights cut across the empty highway as he made the left turn onto State Highway 220. The light ahead remained fixed in his vision, not moving like an aircraft, not blinking like a beacon, and far too bright to be a star. His training told him to investigate. 20 years as a licensed pilot told him this was no normal aircraft. The squad car accelerated, eating up the asphalt as Johnson narrowed the distance between himself and the anomalous glow. The radio hissed with static unusual, this far from civilization. He reached to adjust the volume, but the interference grew stronger, a white noise that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. At 1:40 a.m. exactly, Johnson glanced at his wristwatch to note the time for his report. The second hand ticked steadily. And then everything changed. The light, previously ahead in the distance, was suddenly everywhere, not approaching from the front, but materializing inside the vehicle itself. The transition happened in milliseconds. One moment Johnson was driving toward a distant light. The next, the light had somehow circumvented space, manifesting directly around him. His eyes registered impossible brightness, beyond what human vision was designed to process. The pain was immediate and severe-like, staring directly at an arc welder without protection. Johnson instinctively raised one arm to shield his face, the other still gripping the wheel. A high-pitched hum filled the car, rising in frequency beyond the threshold of hearing. The dashboard electronics fluctuated, lights brightening, dimming, brightening again. The radio erupted with a burst of static so loud it seemed to physically press against his eardrums. Then came the sound of glass breaking. The windshield fractured in a strange pattern, not from a single impact point, but in a spiderweb pattern that spread uniformly across the glass. Simultaneously, the driver's side headlight shattered. The hood of the car deformed inward as if struck by an invisible force. Johnson's hands were no longer on the wheel. The squad car continued moving forward, but now without guidance, drifting across the empty highway. The speedometer needle dropped gradually, though he hadn't touched the brakes. The vehicle was coasting, as if caught in some current beyond his control. Time itself seemed to warp. The second hand on his wristwatch appeared to freeze between ticks. The digital dashboard clock remained fixed at 1:40 a.m., the colon between hours and minutes no longer blinking. The burning sensation in his eyes intensified. The light was evaluating him, somehow not merely illuminating but examining. Johnson felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, assessed, cataloged by something operating according to principles beyond his comprehension. The boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness blurred. Johnson's awareness began to fragment, like a signal breaking up. His last coherent thought was the realization that he had encountered something that existed outside his framework for understanding reality. Then darkness. The return to consciousness was abrupt. Johnson found himself slumped over the steering wheel, a small trickle of blood from a contusion on his forehead. His eyes burned as if scorched. The inside of the car was dark. The smell of electrical burning hung in the air. Disorientation overwhelmed him. Where was he? What had happened? His law enforcement training kicked in, compelling him to assess the situation systematically. The squad car had come to rest at a perfect 90-degree angle to the highway. Through the shattered windshield, Johnson could see stars wheeling overhead. The silence was absolute, with just the faint tick of cooling metal. His eyes fell on the dashboard clock. 2:19 a.m. Impossible. He'd noted the time at 1:40 a.m. just moments ago. Johnson checked his wristwatch. 2:05 a.m. 39 minutes had passed while he was unconscious. But his watch was 14 minutes behind the car clock, as if both timepieces had stopped at the moment of encounter and then restarted 14 minutes slow. The realization sent a wave of cold fear through him. Time itself had been affected by whatever had happened. Johnson's hands shook as he reached for the radio. Years of professional discipline steadied his voice as he pressed the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. The response was immediate, a reassuring link to the normal world. "Go ahead, Unit 4. Something hit me. Something just hit my car." A brief pause then. "Location? Highway 220, about 10 miles west of Stephen. Are you injured?" Johnson took a moment to assess himself. The stinging in his eyes was severe. A dull ache radiated from the contusion on his forehead, but he seemed otherwise intact. "I think I'm okay." "Can you identify what you hit?" His eyes swept over the damage visible from the driver's seat, the spiderweb pattern fracturing the windshield, the crushed hood, the bent antennas. There was no blood, no fur, no debris that would indicate a collision with an animal or another vehicle. "I don't know what it was. It wasn't a vehicle. I don't know what the hell it was." When he managed to open the driver's side door and step outside, the full extent of the damage became apparent. Both antennas were bent at precise angles. The hood was dented inward. One headlight and one hazard light were shattered. The squad car had somehow coasted 854 feet after impact before coming to rest at its current position. Most disturbing was the absence of any conventional explanation. Standing alone on that empty highway, Johnson confronted a reality that had fundamentally shifted. The world was the same: the stars overhead, the asphalt beneath his feet, the distant silhouettes of farm buildings against the night sky. But his place in it had altered irrevocably. How do you reconcile the world you know with a moment that defies everything you've ever believed? Something had reached across the boundary between known and unknown. Something had intersected with him on that lonely stretch of Highway 220. Something had affected both physical matter and the progression of time itself. He had no framework to process this experience. His law enforcement training covered everything from armed confrontation to natural disasters, but offered no protocol for an encounter with something that defied conventional explanation. Later, after the medical examination, after the official report, after the investigations by the Air Force and FAA and Center for UFO Study, Shea would become known nationally as the deputy who hit a UFO. But in this moment, standing beside his damaged vehicle on an empty highway in the middle of the night, Val Johnson was simply a man confronting the shattering of his understanding of reality. The deputy reached back into the car for his flashlight, wincing as the light aggravated his injured eyes. He began methodically documenting the scene, falling back on procedure when comprehension failed. Measure the skid marks. Note the angle of the vehicle relative to the road. Document the damage pattern. This was the moment when Deputy Val Johnson's life cleaved into before and after. Everything that followed, the media attention, the scientific investigations, the speculation would flow from this singular moment when the impossible had manifested on a desolate Minnesota highway. And as the first responding officers approached in the distance, their headlights gradually brightening on the horizon, Johnson made a decision that would define his response to the incident for decades to come. He would report exactly what he had experienced, no more and no less. No claims about aliens or spaceships, just the facts as he had observed them. Something had hit his car. He didn't know what the hell it was. The rest of the world could make of that what they would. August 27th, 1979, 1:40 a.m. The Warren Hospital room was antiseptic and quiet. Val Johnson sat on the edge of the examination table, his eyes still burning with a pain unlike anything he'd experienced before. The doctor had applied ointment and bandages, explaining that the injuries resembled welder's burns as if Johnson had stared directly into an arc welder without protective equipment. The bump on his forehead was minor, requiring no stitches. His physical injuries would heal, but the deeper wound wasn't visible. Dawn spilled pale light through the hospital windows. In the corridor outside, Sheriff Dennis Brecky conferred with other officers in hushed tones. The squad car had been towed to a secure garage at the sheriff's office. Photographs had been taken, measurements recorded, reports filed. All the proper procedures followed for an incident that defied procedure. Johnson's uniform shirt lay folded on a chair beside him. His badge caught the morning light, the emblem of authority and order now seeming strangely insufficient. For 13 years, that badge had represented his place in a world governed by explicable laws, both legal and physical. Now those laws had been challenged in ways he couldn't process. The doctor returned with discharge papers and instructions. Rest for the eyes. No driving until the sensitivity subsided. Johnson nodded, not trusting himself to speak. How could he explain that his eyes were the least of his concerns? That something far more fundamental had been damaged? Sheriff Brecky drove him home. The early morning landscape of rural Marshall County passed by the passenger window farmhouses, grain silos, fields stretching to the horizon. All so ordinary, so unchanged. The world continued as if nothing had happened. At home, Roseanne met him at the door, their baby daughter in her arms, their school-age child peering from behind her with wide, curious eyes. The concern on Roseanne's face shifted to confusion when she saw the bandages around his eyes. Johnson's reassurances felt hollow even as he spoke them. That evening, after the children were asleep, he stood at the kitchen window staring at the night sky. The stars were the same stars he'd known all his life, yet now they seemed to hold unsettling possibilities. Roseanne approached quietly, standing beside him without speaking. The silence between them was filled with unasked questions. Johnson struggled to articulate what had happened on that lonely stretch of highway. How could he return to normal patrol duties? How could he write parking tickets or respond to noise complaints when his understanding of reality had been so fundamentally challenged? The telephone rang, the first of what would become an endless stream of calls. Reporters, UFO enthusiasts, skeptics, all wanting a piece of his experience. Roseanne answered, then returned with a notepad full of messages. The intrusion of the outside world had begun. At the sheriff's office, Val's damaged patrol car became the center of intense scrutiny. Officers who had worked alongside him for years approached the vehicle with professional curiosity that quickly transformed to uneasy silence. The damage pattern defied conventional explanation, the windshield fractured in a spiderweb pattern without a clear impact point. Both antennas bent at precise angles, the hood dented inward as if struck by some powerful force. Most disturbing were the timepieces. Both the car's dashboard clock and Johnson's wristwatch had stopped at 1:40 a.m., then restarted 14 minutes slow. Two separate systems experiencing identical malfunctions, a coincidence beyond statistical probability. Sheriff Brecky stood examining the vehicle, his face grave. The department had protocols for every type of incident: vehicle collisions, criminal assaults, natural disasters. There was no protocol for this. As the senior law enforcement officer in Marshall County, the responsibility for determining next steps fell to him. The Air Force and Federal Aviation Agency provided their reports within days. No aircraft had been scheduled or reported in that area during the early hours of August 27th. The explanation would not be found in conventional aviation. On August 30th, 3 days after the incident, the sheriff's office held a press conference. Cameras flashed as Johnson, eyes still bandaged, described exactly what he had experienced. Something had collided with his vehicle. He didn't know what it was. Assigned to press release duty while his eyes healed, Johnson found himself at a desk rather than on patrol, answering the same questions repeatedly from an endless rotation of reporters. Each retelling required him to revisit those moments on Highway 220, the light entering the car, the sound of breaking glass, the 39 missing minutes, the 14-minute time discrepancy. At home, the family's routine disintegrated under the weight of national attention. The telephone rang constantly. News vans parked at the end of their driveway. Strangers appeared at their door, some sympathetic, others accusatory. Roseanne handled what she could. shielding their children from the most intrusive aspects of sudden notoriety. How does one continue to live a life governed by reason when that very reason is shattered beyond repair? In an interview with the Minneapolis Star in September, Roseanne expressed how completely the incident had disrupted their family organization. With a baby requiring attention and a school-aged child to care for, the constant phone calls created an impossible situation. Guy Westcott from the Center for UFO Studies arrived on September 4th to conduct magnetic testing on the car and interview Johnson. The deputy approached the session with cautious hope for answers. The meticulous examination lasted hours, with Westcott documenting every dent, crack, and bend in the vehicle. When asked if the damage could have been caused by a collision with another vehicle or large animal, Johnson's assessment was definitive and impossible. On September 11th, Johnson appeared on Good Morning America, telling his story to a national audience. He maintained the same careful account, describing only what he had directly experienced, refusing to speculate about aliens or spaceships. His measured testimony, combined with the physical evidence and official investigation, lent the incident a credibility uncommon in UFO reports. In November, Honeywell engineer Roland Wardell examined the patrol car at the sheriff's office. His professional assessment concluded that an electrical force or thing had caused the damage, and that no single earthly explanation could account for all of it. Johnson returned to active duty after his eyes healed, but the experience followed him on every patrol. Each stretch of dark highway potentially concealed something beyond ordinary understanding. Each call on the radio might be the beginning of another inexplicable encounter. The certainties that had defined his life and career had been irrevocably altered. For the Johnson family, the raw aftermath of the incident would eventually necessitate more drastic measures. The constant intrusion of media and curious strangers proved too disruptive to sustain. Within a few years, they would relocate from Oslo to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, a geographical attempt to distance themselves from an event that had forever changed their lives. The damaged patrol car remained behind, preserved exactly as it appeared on that August night, a tangible reminder of questions that would never be fully answered. The lights of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, spread beneath the night sky, different constellation from the rural darkness of Marshall County, Minnesota. Val Johnson stood on the back porch of his new home, gazing upward as he had done countless times since that August night in 1979. The move across state lines had provided some distance from the incident, but not escape. Some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Years had passed since the encounter on Highway 220. The burns to his eyes had healed completely. The bump on his forehead had disappeared within days. But the invisible imprint of those 39 missing minutes and those 14 minutes that somehow vanished from both his wristwatch and the squad car's clock remained permanently engraved in his consciousness. The Johnson family had gradually rebuilt a semblance of normalcy. Their children no longer needed shielding from persistent phone calls and unexpected visitors. The relocation had created a buffer between their daily lives and an incident that had momentarily made them national news. Yet the questions persisted. What had happened on that desolate stretch of highway? The official investigations yielded no definitive conclusions. The Air Force and FAA confirmed no aircraft in the area. The Center for UFO Studies conducted magnetic testing without conclusive results. The Honeywell engineer found the damage consistent with some form of electrical force, but could identify no single earthly explanation for all of it. What happens to a person's sense of reality when the unexplainable becomes a part of their past? In December 1979, the National Observers on Aerial Phenomena suggested ball lightning as a possible factora rare scientific phenomenon that produces fast-moving spheres of light. This hypothesis offered a framework within conventional physics, though it failed to account for the precise pattern of damage and the identical time discrepancy in two separate timepieces. Back in Marshall County, the damaged patrol car became a silent witness. Rather than being repaired, it was preserved exactly as it appeared after the incident. The spider-webbed windshield, the dented hood, the bent antennas, the broken lights all remained intact, eventually finding a permanent home at the Marshall County Historical Society in Warren. The car acquired an identity of its own, the UFO car, drawing more visitors to the small historical society than any other artifact. A mundane piece of law enforcement equipment transformed into a tangible connection to mystery. For the residents of Warren and the surrounding area, the incident became woven into local identity. 40 years later, in 2019, They would celebrate the anniversary with a public event featuring live music, an alien costume contest, and a dramatic reenactment of Johnson's radio call. The incident's ripples extended into cultural imagination. The X-Files featured a similar time-loss event in its pilot episode. Fargo included a UFO encounter in tribute. And in 2019, Newsweek placed the Val Johnson Incident at number 10 on its list of the 25 most credible UFO sightings of all time. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy existed in the altered worldview of those directly touched by the event. For Val Johnson, the encounter had permanently expanded the parameters of possibility. The universe contained more than he had been trained to perceive, a reality both humbling and awesome. When Johnson looked up at the night sky from his Wisconsin backyard, he did so with the awareness that some questions have no answers, that some experiences defy categorization. He had encountered something that existed outside conventional explanation, something that had left physical evidence, affected the progression of time itself, and been officially investigated by authorities. What remained was the mystery, neither fully embraced nor dismissed. The damaged patrol car stands as a tangible reminder of this uncertainty, drawing visitors who come to see for themselves the physical aftermath of an encounter with the unexplained. And somewhere along Highway 220, 10 miles west of Stephen, Minnesota, there is a stretch of ordinary asphalt where something extraordinary once happened. The road continues on, the stars wheel overhead, and the questions remain, echoing across decades. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.